It's quite an honor to be envious of someone gaining 1.5 pounds of weight in a day, but for most people, this might be a nightmare. Today's story comes from a netizen named Trace. As for this story, 7 years ago, he smelled half of the Buddha. Since smelling the tattoo, everything has gone wrong, especially in the 3rd year. One night, in a state between sleep and wakefulness, he saw a girl sitting by his bed, looking at him affectionately. The girl was wearing a red sayuhi suit, and only her melon seed face was visible. He couldn't see her full appearance. Since that night, he has been able to dream of her continuously. In this dream, the girl told him that she was from Sichuan and asked if he had forgotten her. Later, she appeared more and more frequently. Sometimes she was wearing a red kimono, sometimes a white cheongsam. Each time, she sat by Trace's bed, constantly talking about something, and Trace was like having a nightmare. He couldn't move, but his life during the day was still normal, and nothing strange happened, so he didn't take it seriously. Therefore, 2 years later, during this period, the girl appeared from time to time. In the 5th year, Li Heng's body began to have problems and started to gain weight abnormally. His weight gain was very fast, and he could gain 1.5 pounds in a day. It was exaggerated that he could gain 1 pound after waking up from a nap. Moreover, his flesh all grew on his stomach, and his stomach looked like a balloon, as if he was continuously gaining weight in 2 months. Everyone knew something was wrong, so he followed his friend's advice and went to a nearby temple to ask for an amulet. After wearing it, his weight really stopped increasing. Just when Li Heng thought it was fine, something terrible happened. In July 2022, to be precise, at 1:15 a.m. on July 25, Li Heng hadn't slept yet, lying in bed playing with his mobile phone. Suddenly, a cold hand touched his foot. He instinctively reacted quickly and pulled his foot back. Then he stood up and looked at the end of the bed, but found nothing. With suspicion, Trace finally fell asleep. As a result, he woke up the next morning and found himself paralyzed and couldn't get out of bed. Later, he slowly bit the edge of the bed with his teeth and sat up, wanting to stand up, but could only rely on external support, but he fell to the ground in less than 2 seconds, and his legs had no strength. It wasn't until after 10 o'clock that the sunlight came in, and he felt much better, almost able to stand up. His first reaction was that there was something wrong with his body, so he went to the First People's Hospital of Fuyang District, Hangzhou City, and took an X-ray. The doctor didn't say anything after looking at it and let Li Heng go back first, but the next morning, it was the same. This is obviously very wrong. Therefore, he asked someone in his hometown to help contact a famous witch and wanted to ask what happened, so when she arrived at the witch's place, the witch kept patting her left hand after hearing Li Heng's birthday, saying that this hand has brought you trouble. Coincidentally, half of the Buddha's tattoo was on the left shoulder. Later, the witch said, "I don't know what your hand did, but this hand has brought you a woman who has been with you for several years." Naturally, Li Heng wanted to know how to solve this problem. The witch just said, "I asked him to ask." A few minutes later, the witch, "Grandma," suddenly, the voice turned into a young woman's voice, and the voice said that Trace was her husband in the previous life, and life finally found her, and also wanted Trace to be her husband. That silly clutch, also don't know what to say. This time, the witch, like a person singing a duet, a person with 2 voices, her original voice spoke, saying, "You two are impossible, you are not in the same world." Later, the witch explained that Li Heng put 49 leaves under the pillow for 49 days, and then threw them into the river to drift with the river. In this way, the woman can take the ladder to heaven and leave. So on the 2nd day after this matter was completed, Lee K went to wash half of the tattoo on his face. When washing, there was nothing, but less than a second after washing, he began to feel dizzy and the sky was spinning. Later, after washing the tattoo, it was only 3 days. Without deliberately losing weight, he unconsciously lost more than 12 pounds. Until the 49th day in the evening, he left the trace. He lost those leaves during the day. At 1 o'clock in the morning, there was a sudden knock on the door. To be precise, he pushed the door with the palm of his hand. This trace used to open the door, but not long after, there was a pushing door sound again. At that time, everyone was very panicked, but in this process, Trace suddenly felt very sad. If you are really your wife in the previous life, would you hurt her by doing this? After the 4th push of the door, Trace went to open the door again, standing at the door and saying, "You go, if we have a fate, we will see each other in the next life." After that, the originally quiet and dark corridor suddenly made a sound of the wind blowing the leaves, and then a very ethereal voice floated from the dark of the corridor in the distance. "Do you really not want me?" Then it was quiet. That night, Trace slept poorly because he dreamed of her again, sitting at the end of his bed, crying with his back to Trace. When he woke up the next day, he found tears on his face and the pillow was wet. Later, his body gradually returned to its original state, and he never dreamed of her again. To be honest, this story is so sad and beautiful, you can shoot a floating love story. Well, see you next story.